Now we come to another non-standard case as the outcome of utility maximization, namely inferior goods. Usually for normal goods, the demand for the good increases when the income of the consumer, the budget available to be spent, increases. But there is an exception, and these are inferior goods. What happens in case of such inferior goods? Assume again we have two goods to consume, good 1 and good 2. We have a budget constraint and a budget line that reflects the consumption possibilities of the two goods, and we have certain preferences of the household reflected in this indifference curve that is red here, where the initial consumption point would be this one, where we would have 16 units of good 2 and about 7.5 units of good 1 that are consumed. Now the available budget of the consumer increases, which means that the budget constraint shifts outward away from the origin, so the feasible set for consumption bundles increases. But in this case, what we would see is that the indifference curve that is tangent to the budget line at this point here is at a point where the consumption of good 1 actually decreased. The consumption of good 2 still increased, but the consumption of good 1 decreased. And this is a rather unusual case when we think of normal goods, but it has a very intuitive economic explanation what happens here. This explanation, this intuitive explanation, is rooted in the fact that you have two goods that are close substitutes, but one is a good that you consider to be superior and the other is a good that you consider to be inferior. If your available budget increases, you would shift consumption away from the good that you perceive as inferior towards the one that you perceive as superior. For example, there are many examples in the economic literature. One that I find very intuitive is holiday traveling to close destinations versus holiday traveling overseas. So to close destinations, for example, if income is low, people would for example, take the bus and travel to a close by location or drive with their own car, but that doesn't allow them to travel very far distances. But the demand for long distance flights for vacation purpose is then rather low. Most people would do their vacation close to their destination where they live. However, as incomes rise, the demand for overseas traveling and for long distance flights increases quite strongly, and people instead reduce their holiday traveling by bus, by train, and so on to more close by locations. So in this case, the holiday at the close by location traveling by bus and by train and so on would be inferior to traveling further distances by long distance flights. So then as incomes rise, the demand for flights would increase, but the demand for bus and train rides and so on would decrease. Other examples may include whole foods versus standard consumption of food, where you increase the amount of whole food consumption when your income rises and reduce the consumption of other types of food, or the consumption of meat when incomes rise. In low-income countries, that's typically the case that the consumption of meat increases and the consumption of other substitutes for meat decrease. And there are many different examples in economics for such inferior goods. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope you found it interesting and useful. For more videos on economic content, please visit my channel that you find here to the left. And to the right, you see the next video in the series at the top, and at the bottom, you see the whole lecture in the form of a playlist.